Hello, welcome back to The Inner. Today I'm joined by my brother, Bennie E. Calloway III. Hey, my brother, how you doing?
Doing great. Pastor Nelson, it's an honor to be with you today. Looking forward to the conversation.
It's an honor to have you. If you could introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I would begin just by saying that I'm a um, second generation preacher and pastor. Um, my father's currently in the ministry. He's been in ministry about 45 years. So I grew up as a PK, um, experiencing all the ins and outs, ups and downs of churchianity, religion, and very strict Pentecostal, holiness type um, background, and even as a kid growing up, I knew that there was so much more, to experiencing God than what I was being exposed to. And then eventually, my father he branched out from the denomination that we were part of and started his own ministry. And then in that transition period, um, I was born again at 16, but a lot of my thinking concerning God and spiritual things was still shaped by that, type of environment that I grew up in. It still had a lot of rules, regulations, restrictions, limitations. And then 2 years later, when I attended college, um, I was really exposed to a lot of young believers, from really all over the world of different denominational backgrounds. And so I began to connect with, other students on campus. And then I began to go attend other churches and be involved in campus ministries. And so it really began to open my mind up and see a world of faith outside of, what I had been exposed to. And I had a chance to recognize how um, sheltered, my life had been in church. Consequently, I received my call in the ministry. I started a Bible study on campus with about 14 guys, cramped in my dorm. And then eventually it grew to 70, 75 people. I started preaching around the city in that community, um, became the president of the gospel choir. We traveled different churches. So it was a real exciting experience as I really began to launch in ministry at only 19 years of age. And my wife, we um, were married. 1995, we were married for 24 years. She passed away in May of 2019. We have two daughters. Our oldest will be 20 this year, and the youngest will be 19. So for the next 25 years, I basically pastored several churches, in the South Georgia area, um, denominational churches. I ended up doing, two church plants in that whole process. But by the time I was 40 years old, I was just disgusted with the whole thing. It was like I had a crisis of conscience. Some may call it midlife crisis. Um, I began to question everything that I believed and why I believed it. And I came to a discovery, about 10 years ago that much of what I had learned and believed coming up in church and even preaching it, pastoring, believing it, it no longer served me. It no longer worked in my life. I wasn't seeing the fruit behind it. So the last 10 years has really been a time of unraveling, um, deconstruction, which is a pretty known term. especially in this time in this culture. So I've spent a lot of time, working my way out of the religious system and the traditional church. And of course, it's definitely come with a price of experiencing abandonment, um, loneliness, um, being labeled as a heretic, leaving the faith, leaving God, leaving the church, all those things that come with it. So the last 10 years have really been a liberating experience for me. I wrote two books, within that period, have done and am currently involved in doing schools of ministry and just really focusing on doing ministry online and really reaching people that need to identify with others that are kind of going through the same spiritual journey, so they'll know that they're not alone. And it's been a great experience to be able to connect with others of like faith, especially in this social media community. Have an opportunity to meet you and so many others on this journey. Um, that's somewhat of a brief description of where I'm at. But however, there was so much that took place um, within that period of time. And so my whole mindset, my whole view um, on the church, on doing ministry, really understanding the gospel, understanding the kingdom, understanding my own giftings and anointings and graces and the role that it plays in the global construct of spirituality. It's really been liberating. It's been a great experience. Um, and I'm grateful that I'm at this place. I would not imagine 10 years ago that the beginning of that journey, would bring me to where I am now. And I'm experiencing a liberty that, I've never experienced before. I can remember last year in 2023, I made it a personal thing in my own life that 2023 was going to be a year of absolute liberty, that I was going to be very intentional in breaking free from associations, affiliations, all that may have hindered me from completely evolving into the person that Christ has always intended. So that's where I am this year. Um, I'm focusing more on just being more bold and being more direct and being more forthright of sharing truth as it is revealed to me, because there's an audience out here that's searching and reaching um, for truth that's going to actually liberate them and not incarcerate them. So this is where I'm at present. I
Okay.
have completely left the pastorate altogether. Um, that framework is no longer suitable for the agenda that I believe that the Lord has for my life and the people that He's intended to reach.
Yeah. And that was going to be my next question, which is what does ministry look like now versus what it looked like then? Because I believe I heard you say that you now do like a ministry school.
Hmm. Yeah, I have a school of ministry that I do online weekly, and it's just open to the public, just teaching different series, different modules to those that are open to receive that. I'm also doing some mentoring with leaders to see to it that they have a proper foundation um, in their ministry, where they actually begin with truth, that's unfiltered, that's not um, diluted with religion, or denominationalism. So really trying to help leaders, get a good start. It's taken me, 35 years to get to this point. So if I can help leaders from the very beginning, where they can eliminate experiencing a lot of headaches and heartaches and just unnecessary things that come with um, coming into discovery of who they are in the Lord's kingdom.
Okay. So kind of draw a distinction for us. How would you describe the difference between religion and spirituality, or religion and the kingdom?
Wow, it's a lot of angles I could approach from that. I posted something yesterday, and I just want to pull that as a point of reference that I think that we can um, build this conversation from. Actually, I made two posts yesterday. The first one is ministry is about connections, while religion is about concoctions.
Hmm.
And with religion is always trying to find a way to concoct some type of scheme or strategy to continue to keep people in bondage, whether they use the Bible, whether they use, church services, their own preaching, their, evangelism appeals, certain doctrines. There are always concoctions that they're coming up with. But when you talk about spirituality, when you talk about the kingdom, it's about being able to connect with men and women of like faith that's concerned about being able to liberate others. As Paul said, so we can live in the newness of the spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. And then there was another post I made. I was just sitting in the restaurant, and both of these thoughts just came to me. And this one I posted, it says, religion focuses on what's brewing, while spirituality focuses on what's birthing. So without spirituality, there's a constant birthing and a newness that's taking place. Revelation, insight, um,
Yeah.
mysticism, meditation, and there's always a forward progression. Whereas religion is always growing up something. Religious leaders and religious people, they're always behind the scenes, coming up with something to engender bondage in the lives of men and women that want to be free, because they realize it's no longer profitable for them if people are free. Because with that control becomes profitable. It becomes advantageous for them. So their inability to retain people, it affects their finances, it affects their ego, it affects their ministry, it affects the image that they project, to the public, and they don't want to lose that. So, you have religious leaders everywhere, even pastors in churches. I mean, they're full of straws, so whatever they can brew up or whatever they can concoct, desperate situations call for desperate measures. So there are so many strategies that religious individuals are using to try to hang on to people. But once people are enlightened and illuminated, there can be no reversal.
Yeah. And I can definitely agree with that. Like, I kind of like the verbiage you use in that it's brewing and concocting, because it reveals two different angles of something that I've long time seen. Is that uh it, even the part that you mentioned about the intimacy aspect, the
Mhm.
currency of the kingdom is intimacy. It's all about who you know and how close you are, how trusted you are by an individual. The kingdom can function and not a dollar can be spent. Like, it doesn't run on money because it's a people
Absolutely.
that can't be bought. There's no price tag on the people that live in the kingdom. So that's one thing. It's all intimacy based. In religion, it's about what you do, how much can you benefit me, all those other how well can you serve. Uh,
Right.
then thinking about that whole concoction, it implies that they know it's fake, that they have to build it, they have to set the scene, they have to get the mood right, they have to build the structure, they have to maintain the image, which means they have to do a lot of crowd control.
It's a
And
lot of
then
work.
and then the brewing versus birthing also is a level of intimacy and involvement, in that if something's brewing, that means somebody else is cooking. That's
That's
somebody
right.
else work that I'm waiting to benefit from when they get done with it. But if it's a
Right.
birthing, if I'm involved in that, that means it's my own process that's done when it's ready, and I have to be intimately involved throughout the whole thing.
And
So
that's
I
what
love that.
religious people don't want you
Yeah.
to
So I love that. Just that what we're experiencing is a birthing. Religious people are still expecting something that's brewing to finally get done. I've had
know.
someone, I've had this topic come up in my community several times where people like, oh, this awakening's going to come. There's going to be this mass outpouring. There's going to be this. All these manifestations are going to start. And I'm a mystic. I've done all types of things supernaturally. I still move in the supernatural. It didn't stop for me. And my response is that because they'll ask me, when do you think this is going to manifest? I'm like, well, I know the timeline is that we have about 30 years to get this finished. But if we lollygag, it could take longer. If we really get to it, it could be a bit shorter than that. But it's
Yeah.
all up to
Yeah.
our ability to work that vision out. It's like, well, isn't God sovereign? Yes, sovereign enough to give us a task to fulfill. In that the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
manifestation of it doesn't happen if we don't do anything. God's not working on something that we just get to be happy about and we get our plate first. No, if we don't, I can't use that reference. I got Africans on. I'm like, if we don't participate in the growing, we'll never see a harvest. This mass harvest that we're looking for, this mass awakening, this mass change on the earth, it's not coming if if we don't get it to happen.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, our ability to engage in conversation as we're doing now, building community, reaching and connecting and networking with others, it strengthens our manpower and it strengthens our resolve to create a greater death blow,
Yeah.
um, to the religious forces that that oppose us. It's a personal mission for myself, but looking at it from a wider lens as we connect with others, it's a corporate mission, even though we have our own
Yeah.
individualized battles. But looking at it from a larger lens, this is all of our battle that we have to engage in. So one or a few individuals, won't have to exhaust all of their strength in their quest, to battle against these religious forces.
Yeah. And it's like there's nobody just on the sidelines watching the others work. They're like, man, I can't wait till they get done. It's like, nah, everyone involved benefits because everyone was involved. And it's not
Absolutely.
even the idea of we got to make it happen in the way that it was in religion or outside of the kingdom, because there is such thing as just doing things out of a work ethic. It's not necessarily the same thing, because again, the currency of the kingdom is intimacy. Most of this
Absolutely.
transfiguration is self-help, is unbecoming the things that we've allowed our culture to put on us, so that we can
Right.
now be the vessel that's perfectly prepared when things are entering in the earth. God, the outpouring happened centuries ago.
That's
We've
right.
always been in an outpouring. There's always things being released. We miss them because we're not intimate.
That is true. That is so true. Even when I mentioned about my own journey, these were initiatives that I took on my own because I wanted to find out what it was going to take for me to be free. So I didn't have a counseling session or consultation, with the individual. Uh, Again, it was the currency that I used. It was the time of intimacy that I read and that I meditated, that I um, took into account what I was believing and why I was believing it. Did it add to or take away from the quality of my life? Even my own verbiage, my church verbiage, or different expressions that I use, while I talk, while I minister. This was all about being able to eliminate from my life all that was unnecessary, that opened my eyes to be able to see the necessary. I was listening to my mentor today. He said that a little over 15 years ago, he had spiritual cataract surgery, where he was able to see the love of God, but the scales had to fall off his eyes. And he referenced um, Paul's subsequent conversion, and that the scales that fell off were scales of religion. How he saw men and women as it related to the law and his Hebraic heritage, etc. So that engaging is what produces your own liberation. It is not something that, like you said, is going to be given to you or happen by osmosis. There has to be intentional engaging if you want to be free.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your mentors, maybe some of your inspirations. Who were some of your mentors, and what are some of the things that they helped you with, or some of the things that you've learned from them or gained from them?
Well, I would say first of all, my father's one of my mentors. He's been in ministry 45 years, and for him to walk away from a denomination that he was saved in and worked and labored in, and to be able to walk away from that because of his own dreams and visions about what it was that the Lord had dealt with him about doing in ministry, amidst controversy, gossip, them convincing him that walking away from the denomination was like walking away from God Himself. So for him to have the courage um, to do that, in the late '80s, early '90s, and for him to continue to walk through an evolutionary stage, he definitely has my respect and gratitude. I would also say another mentor that really contributed to my spiritual journey was Bishop Carlton Pearson. Um, I had always kept up with Bishop Pearson's ministry ever since I was, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, and just saw his entire evolution, over the last 20 years. And so when I began to go through my own deconstruction, um, I purchased Gospel of Inclusion and God's Not a Christian. And, I read those books vociferously. And much of what he preached and taught, it so resonated with me that just really freed me from a lot of things. So for him to be able to do, what he did as well, being one of the most popular ministers in America and around the world, um, for him to walk away from that for his own personal liberty and welfare, he's someone that I greatly admire. Also, and I was talking with somebody about this too. I would even say Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I don't think people really understood how inclusionary Dr. King was.
Not at all. They miss him entirely because we're not actually taught about the real him in school. The real him was a whole
Right.
lot cooler.
He was. I mean, when you talk about his heritage of Baptist preachers, his father, his grandfather, uncle, brother, and for him to even adopt strategies for his own ministry, his own mission from from Gandhi and from so many other philosophical studies that he engaged in. He was such an inclusionist during that time, and he's not even given justice in the media or in the history books. But when
Yeah.
you really do more intentional research, about his life, he was just so far ahead of his time. I mean, it was just it was ridiculous, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the more I study about his life, the more I come into new discoveries about his inclusionary stances concerning uh, faith and just liberty in general, not just the racial aspect, but even from a global aspect. So these men, um, contemporary and historical, have been great, um, influences in my life. I've read so many other, um, books about great men that, had courage and freed themselves from a lot of the religious bondages that enslaved them. And of course, I have a very, broad library that I continue to feed off of that really, helps me to remain free.
Yeah. Because something that I've often said just concerning like history itself is that if we're talking about Black people in America, the last time you can say that Black people collectively cared about themselves was the 70s,
Hmm.
following the
Yeah.
death of Martin, Malcolm, and the dismantling of the Black Panthers.
Hmm.
That was the
Right.
last time you could say we was all on one accord. And that's a great example of what the kingdom looks like on earth. Wasn't much money getting spent. We didn't have it. That's part of the protest. It was just people
That's
working
true.
with what they had in the communities, doing as much as they could for each other. What was the currency? Intimacy. What was the payoff? The
Yeah,
community.
yeah,
Like,
we have definitely.
and like my
Yeah, we
understanding of the reason that Martin was assassinated in the first place, I don't believe it was just that he was able to protest and get voting rights. I believe they saw him as that big of a threat. Like he was on the most wanted list and was nonviolent. Not because he was violent, but because the man had an authority that was rivaling the president's and he had no political office.
Exactly, and that's usually the case. That's usually the case for liberators, because their greatest work is not inside the system. Their greatest work is outside the system, and they pose as a threat, to the system. Uh, Therefore, they want to see to it that they're eliminated. Just like I was doing a teaching the other night about when Nicodemus came to Jesus, and he said, "Rabbi, we know your teacher comes from God. No man can do these miracles that you do except God is with him." And Jesus' preaching and teaching had such an impact in Palestine until it affected and infected, the religious establishment. And they're like, "How can these multitudes follow him, and he's not even functioning according to the law of Moses. He's not even functioning according to our traditions, and he has this kind of following. We got to inquire about this." Of course, I believe that Nicodemus volunteered to go because he was an admirer of Christ. I don't think he was belligerent, um, toward Christ, and therefore, his life was transformed from that encounter that he had with Christ. So you're going to always have representatives from the system that want to track us and troll us and try to figure out, how are we able to do what we do without relying upon them, for support? Because if we rely on them for support, we'll be a part of the system instead of working contrary to the system.
Yeah. It's like we need their help to get rid of them, and they're not finna help us do that.
Exactly. Exactly.
They already thought about it. The system don't work that way.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And this is great. So you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your ministry, how you help people with their foundations. What are some things that you teach when you're starting people from scratch, when you're building that foundation? What are some of the things you emphasize? Kind of break that down for us.
Okay. Well, I, I emphasize all the basic tenets of the kingdom of God. People have to understand the kingdom because that's what that's what Jesus preached. Understanding the love of God, the grace of God, the kindness of God, the compassion of God, and the inclusion of God. Um, I also teach universal salvation. People have to understand, their identity first and foremost, because without their identity, there's no ingenuity, and with no ingenuity, there's no inheritance. So the focus has to be on to be, to do, and to have. Once people really understand who they are, then they can become a contributing factor um, to society, to the kingdom, um, to the spiritual community. And men and women really have to be empowered with these basic tools if they're going to have any degree of success in being able to impact people that they've been called to, which produces their own spiritual liberty. So once they begin to engage, um, the marketplace, they have a ministry, they have a message, they have a mandate, they have a mantle, and this is all based on them having an understanding of who they are, and then they actually animate that. They walk that out in their lives. They are forever conscious of who they are, where they come from, who they represent, and who they're called to reach. That's paramount, and people don't get that in an average church. The focus is on what you're supposed to do instead of what you're supposed to be. They put the proverbial cart before the horse. People don't know what to do because they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And our ability to be to have ingenuity is birthed out of our identity. So
Yeah.
these are some of the basic things that we deal with in leadership.
Absolutely. Like when I was doing some of my mentorship courses, like I just started another one called School of the Empire. But one of the things that I start people off with is the what am I? Well, you are the solution. Well, what does that mean? Now I'm able to do everything that needs to be done because I am the solution. That means
Right.
within me is everything necessary to handle whatever circumstance it is. But if I just tell you to go fix stuff and you don't know you're the solution, you go into the situation highly confused, feeling highly inadequate. It's like, well, I'm
And that's
supposed to fix this, but I don't have any of the tools necessary. My bad. I didn't tell you that you were the solution.
that's an example of such a distinction and a contrast between what's religious and what's spiritual. And I become very grieved by the fact that there's so many people that are wasting 2 and 3 hours of their time every Sunday hearing things that they really don't need to be hearing,
Yeah.
things that they're being taught that they don't need to be taught, and they're wasting their time, and they're just creating more and more what I call religious buildup, and it's not getting better. It's getting worse. It's really a sad commentary. from that religious aspect.
Yeah. And I'm kind of jumping back and forth, but something else crossed my mind. You mentioned Carlton Pearson, who is
Hmm.
someone I only recently started to respect because the media made me pay attention to him after he died. Because one of my personal pet peeves is waiting until people die to start calling them out for stuff. I'm like, the man taught all this stuff for like 30 years.
Exactly.
They wait till the
Exactly.
man died to now get bold and want to call him all these names. I'm like, I'd respect you if you was loud before he died. Now he can't defend himself. Yeah. But I've
Yeah,
started like people don't realize, and I did a teaching on this, that heretics and forerunners are the same thing. The
they are.
trailblazer and the heretic is the exact same thing. It's just viewed from a different perspective. The people that are able to see you properly will call you a forerunner and a trailblazer. The people who
Hmm.
cannot yet see what you can see, they'll call you a heretic. But the
Right.
definition of a heretic is just someone who's completely different from the current circumstance. Someone who's in their future living in the present. That's a heretic.
That's
We call
powerful.
that a
You know,
visionary. We call that all types of words. But yeah,
I was on another podcast last month, and I stated the reasoning I believe Bishop Pearson was attacked so severely after his death. For one thing, there were a lot of people that were not uh, intellectually or theologically astute to even debate him. Number one, so they had to wait until he died to come up with, this sweet um, commentary. I mean, we saw it all over social media where everybody had their commentary about Bishop Pearson. Like you said, 20 to 30 years he was teaching. Nobody volunteered to have debates with him about inclusion. Number two, I think they were intimidated by him. He knew what he knew. He was confident in what he knew, and he didn't allow anybody to devalue or discount his position, based on his own experience. Thirdly, I think there were those who resented the fact that they were not a part of his Azusa platform in the 80s and 90s. And so when he began to preach and teach inclusion, it wasn't an issue uh, with his doctrine. It was an issue with them not being able to gain access to that platform or that affiliation. And that was their way, of lashing out. So to me, those were variables that played a part in people just coming into, full blast. But I think the benefit of the press that he was receiving after his death, I think it helped to continue to magnify the message and help free people because we have people that are coming out, for the lack of a better phraseology, uh, freeing themselves from religious bondage, and they're being bold and forthright about their beliefs that are contributing to their spiritual freedom and how he was able to plant that seed. And I really consider him as a martyr, because of that belief. I mean, universal salvation was something church fathers taught first 500 years of church history, and we went through different
yeah,
periods and the seasons where it was neglected.
yeah.
And
It's what the word
it,
Catholic means.
yeah, I mean, it really began to become full circle. And then a few years ago we had the celebrate 500 years of the Reformation with Martin Luther. So we see this shifting, that's taking place, that people are having their own spiritual discoveries, and it's not dictated by the hand of religion. That this is what you're supposed to believe, and this is our adoptional statement, and this is what we believe in
Yeah.
this denomination.
Our
And if
bylaws
you're
and
going to
our
be
constitution.
right, right, if you're going to be a part of this church, if you're going to be licensed or ordained by this church, you have to believe this doctrine in order to, hold credentials with us. And those things are just so unprofitable and vain in a time where people are awakening, and those things don't mean anything, um, in the marketplace. I mean, people are brilliant and intelligent, and they're researchers, and people have access to information, like never before, and you just can't tell people anything, because people will challenge you, and you should be challenged because it proves the legitimacy or the validity of your presentation. So if it's not being challenged, how can we, how, in other words, um, if what you teach, if what you advocate is true, you welcome it to be challenged,
Yeah.
so people can see how valid and how legitimate it is, and that you don't have anything to hide, that you're not just coming up with something. And this is what churches and denominations and pastors and preachers, these are the things that they are afraid of.
Yeah.
And
Which
that's why
is
these churches.
like, that's where a lot of conflict with me came from. Before I even left the system, I was just trying to figure some things out, and questions weren't welcomed. Not by my pastor, but by the people who were over certain ministries, where if they didn't know, they would either give you just some random answer that made no sense, or they would tell you that you got to wait to die to get to heaven and God will tell you then. I'm like, dang, we either either it can't make sense or I got to die to get an answer.
That's
And I
poor.
dared to go and hear God and get answers for some things that they had given up on. And my answers dared to make sense.
Exactly. Exactly.
But so, what you were just talking about with the way that he was set up, uh, he intimidated the people who were against him. It kind of
Mhm.
reminds me of a quote that I've heard. I've heard it said many ways by different people, but the premise of it is that if it takes that many people to stand against you, you've got to understand how powerful you are by yourself. That what you
Absolutely.
carry has to be that powerful if it takes an army.
That's true.
And that, more so, the reaction of people after he died proved the authenticity of what he taught.
You're correct. You're correct. And that's a great honor to have bestowed upon you. Of course, unfortunately, it happened, in his death
Yeah.
rather than in his life. Um, but nonetheless, being a heretic, being a forerunner, being a trailblazer, you'll never know your full impact, in your lifetime. The whole objective is to impact, generations to come.
Yeah.
Because somebody has to be first, somebody has to blaze the trail, somebody has to open the door, uh, somebody has to go where no man has gone before. And so it creates an opportunity for those of us like you and myself to be able to follow. There's so many other voices that are beginning to emerge, um, for this generation and for, generations to come.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you have some books. Talk a bit about your books.
Okay, I hated and grabbing, but The first book I wrote was in 2017. Is entitled Deeper Awareness, a Framework for Progressive Spirituality. And so that book basically contributed to, um, my spiritual journey, what I walked away from and what I was finding myself walking into. So it's somewhat of a semi-biographical uh, type book that I wrote in 2017. And 12 chapters. Chapter 4, I dedicated chapter 4 to Bishop Carlton Pearson, and I entitled chapter 4 The Gospel of Inclusion. And I talked about my own um, version and experience of what the gospel of inclusion is. And also last year, 2023, I published a book entitled Follow the Truth and Forget the Trends, helping to restore order in the local church. And I discussed about how the global pandemic of 2020 gave the African American sector of the church such a great death blow that it has not recovered from. And I believe it was an opportunity to expose the Black sector of the church that that they were primarily focusing on entertainment and not, edification, because many of them began to, preach a fear mongering gospel, at that time, uh, from advocating, vaccinations to masks, etc. And they focus more on regurgitating, network news, headline news, rather than capitalizing on the opportunity to preach the good news, uh, through digital means. So much so until when the pandemic lifted, there were pastors and preachers that had never been on social media before. When it let up, they pulled away from social media and and refused to keep that audience because their mindset, they're more driven about being in the building, getting people to come in the building. And many are trying to use the same strategies, when many of them reopen their doors. And the sector of the black, the black sector of the church is really on life support because they're still trying to operate off of games and gimmicks and theatrical performances, week after week, and they haven't recovered, and I don't think they will recover. So I focused on that. I focused on the importance of on spiritual gifts. I also talked about the importance of having having compassion when you do ministry in the marketplace, and I also challenged the role of the first lady or the pastor's wife in the church. So those are my two publications.
Okay. So, what does spirituality look like for you on a personal level? What does your engagement with God look like?
I would say knowing that the Holy Spirit is my constant companion. I can talk with him anywhere, any place, anytime about anything. I can be very transparent, and it's a liberating experience to be able to unburden uh, my soul to him. Uh, that's the first thing. Secondly, having a consistent uh, Bible reading discipline, as well as reading a variety of material from a variety of authors, from a variety of sources, not just limited to church oriented material, but spirituality from all genres. I started that 10 years ago. Um,
if I don't want to cut you out, but what have been some of the texts that you've come to love since branching out of what can be considered Christian texts?
What would be considered Christian texts?
Hmm.
I'm not sure if I really read a lot of Christian texts, or what would be
Well,
identified.
yeah, outside of Christian
Oh,
texts.
Christian outfit. Gotcha, gotcha. Wow. Um, I read material. I read a lot of Michael Bernard Beckwith out of Los Angeles. I read a lot of his material. Uh, Bishop John Shelby Spong. He's deceased, but he was a retired Episcopalian priest. He wrote a lot of material, and I was actually introduced, or at least exposed to his material by by reading Bishop Pearson's material. I'm trying to think who else. Uh, I've read uh, Rob Bell. Of course, Rob Bell, was pretty much a traditional, Christian pastor that kind of transitioned out. Um, just variety of materials, just some of some of the publications just won't come to mind, but I have a very diverse reading discipline that's not restricted to just
Yeah.
Christian texts. You know, I read Eastern Orthodoxy, just a variety, just variety of materials.
Okay. So, outside of, well, since you've transitioned into spirituality versus instead of religion, what does prayer look like for you?
Prayer is just conversational, just throughout the course of the day. It's not informal. On my knees for hours, or having a particular formula. But it's conversational. It's empowerment. It's making confessions. Making sure that I speak. Uh, who I am, what I have. My contribution. To society, and it's just an ongoing um, conversation. With the God within, and it's become very simplified. And I think coming into so many different discoveries of truth is so shaped and altered um, my prayer life until I've learned to just be empowered. The things that I prayed for, I was already empowered with. And my prayer is to simply walk out what I've already been empowered with. In other words, I quit asking God for what I already possess. And that comes through a revelation of truth. And so that's altered my prayer life, tremendously. Um, Speaking what I want to see happen, not what I don't want to see happen. So all of that is, inclusive in prayer. It involves laughter. It involves tears. It involves anger. But I have that liberty, to express myself. So much so until if I happen to be in a church service and I hear somebody pray, it sounds so far and so remote, even though I used to pray that way.
Yeah.
Um, so that's my view of prayer.
Yeah. Because something that I've experienced, I feel like a lot of us experience it to some degree, is that once you back off from the Christian labeling and you still profess a level of connection with God still after that, uh, you usually fall into two categories from outsider perspective. And I've often joked with people around me that people either see me as Billy Graham or they see me as like the Shadow Man from the Princess and the Frog, where either I'm a Bible holding dogmatic guy or I'm a witch doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there's no in between with people. Have you kind of dealt with that too, where it's like, what do you mean you're not? What do you? Well, what are you now? What do you mean you still know God?
Yeah, I would say that to some extent because I don't consider myself as a as a Christian. Um, I do follow I do follow the teachings of Christ, and I told somebody the other day that if I was of another faith discipline, I would still follow the teachings of Jesus because of His love, compassion, forgiveness, mercy, and grace. Um, Even if Jesus did not exist, I would still follow his teachings because they are so powerful in principle that you can even um, parallel with teachings of other um, enlightened spiritual teachers. And like you said, people want to find a way to label you or define you. They're like, what are you? And to me, it's best not to give them a label because label produces limits.
Yeah,
Where they want to keep you in this, in this cage or this limited set of parameters that they, look for you to function, out of. And I think that as we move into deeper dimensions of our spirituality, um, the less it can be defined. I think there'll be a bridge between unseen spirituality and undefined spirituality.
yeah,
You just you can't get your hands on the wind. You can't handle the wind, and so that's how I see it unfolding.
yeah. I've learned how to introduce myself differently depending on who I'm talking to.
Right.
Discerning where they
Right.
are in their development. For some people, I'm just Nelson. For other
Mhm.
people, I'm Apostle Nelson. For some people, I'm Sin Nelson. For some people, I like it just depends on the community what I go by. But they're all true
That's
if you back out and look. They're all true. I refuse to
right.
identify as anything I don't actually like. So I'm nobody's pastor.
Right. Right. And there has to be a flexibility. Yeah, there has to be a flexibility because you're going to be dealing with a diverse group of people, and many times the spiritual communities that we often teach in and expose ourselves in, there's a lot of diversity. So we have to leave ourselves open to know how to, remain flexible and adaptable in certain environments, but yet be able to portray a message that'll be receptive.
Yeah. So we're getting ready to close. Where are some places that people can connect with you and partner with what you're doing, access some of your resources and materials?
Well, I have a website, which is drbennycalloway3rd.com. That's my primary mode of contact, but I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. They can just type in, Benny E. Calloway the third, um, and that's how they can gain access to my website, materials, blogs, different teachings that I have. That's how I can contact.
All right. And I'll just open up this last segment kind of for you to either give closing thoughts, words of wisdom, or if you'd like to pray for the audience, all of that's acceptable just for be yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm really grateful for this opportunity that you provided, for me today, and I just encourage everyone that's listening that you just really have to follow your heart, and many times we have what I call divine indicators, within the recesses of our soul when we know that there's a teaching, there's a church, there's previous training that we've received that just doesn't serve us. It doesn't resonate with where we are in our lives at this time. And in order for you to experience full spiritual freedom, there are just things that you have to be deliberate about abandoning. And like you and I were talking about in the outset of the conversation, this is intentional inside work that you have to do. And you have to be willing to pay the price, for your freedom. And but once you are free, there's no greater feeling or experience in the world knowing that your spiritual life is not being dictated by others telling you what to be, telling you what to do, and telling you what to have. Because with that freedom, it comes responsibility, and you have to do what's necessary to maintain your freedom and your peace as you continue to unfold from religion and as you continue to evolve in spirituality.
That's great. So it's been an honor having you on today. That concludes this episode. Until next time, y'all be blessed.